Frankly speaking, I'm not so surprised about what has happened in the last 2-3 years because as you mentioned, I'm a little bit longer in the market, and I think even the strong dip, which people say, "Oh my God, this is really crazy." If you look in the history, especially on DRAM, I mean, we have seen this in the past, these cycles, like 1 year, like 60% up and then 30% down or 20% down. So it's like always extremely volatile. And this is basically because you have long cycles to build up capacity, right? So you maybe heard the term about the CapEx.
Yeah.
So that's basically capital expenditure for the equipment. So even if a factory decides today, demand is going up, we need to build more capacity, it takes like 12 to 18 months to bring that factory up to speed. And then also, you need to yield, like you need to look that you have a high success rate on the chips, what you're getting out.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to another Making It Happen by Sims podcast. For those of you who follow the semiconductor industry closely, this will probably be quite an exciting one for you today. We have an expert and a very well-known figure in the house today and on the podcast. He actually has, I believe, over 43,000 followers on LinkedIn. Is that right, Marco?
I'm not counting, but you're probably right, yeah.
Yes. So for some of you may already follow his news and his updates on all things memory, semiconductors, and security. But for those who don't, and those who do, it'll be a very interesting listen. And we're going to try and update you on where things are in the industry right now and how we've really got here. So with that, Marco, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
Yeah. And we were just discussing before we come in here. So you're actually based in Taiwan?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah. I'm based in Taipei in Taiwan.
Yeah. So how long have you been based out there?
5 years now. So okay. I'm living here since 5 years. Yeah. Really enjoy it. It's the heart of the semiconductor industry, and the people are absolutely lovely here. It's a great place.
Yeah. So with all that, so do you want to just give a bit more of a background on your industry? And again, let's touch on the LinkedIn work that you do around the updates and what goes into that.
Okay, sure, absolutely. So again, my name is Marco Mezger. I'm originally from Germany, but as just mentioned, lived since 5 years in Taiwan and lived before also Singapore, Hong Kong, China. So traveled most of the time of my life and always worked in the semiconductor industry. So I'm an entrepreneur. I'm an investor and an advisor, working with companies highly focused in the semiconductor industry. I have basically the chance to work in different levels of the industry. I worked in distribution, I worked at manufacturing, I worked in consulting. And so for me, as a passionate leader, I focus mainly in the memory technology, right? So semiconductor is a pretty broad field, but I mainly work in the semiconductor industry. That's my expertise. That's also my passion. I love this, even there's a very high volatility. This also gives a lot of opportunities in terms of helping people, understanding the market. And so that's what I do now almost since, I think around about 25 years. I also work, for example, in the finance community. I work with hedge funds and pension funds to understand the memory market better, as best as we can do it as experts. And also I work in Taiwan on TV shows as an expert, also discussing about this industry. So you mentioned about my LinkedIn. LinkedIn is really something I have developed many years ago already, where LinkedIn was not so popular. And it was a very simple task for me because I saw a lot of informations, it was on LinkedIn, on the internet, and I tried to find a space where I put this information because it was very valuable information, which I want to keep. And I started to basically post it and save it. So in my feed, I saw these informations like the statistics and all of this. And somehow more and more people had the same idea. They also want to see this. And I'm curating everything by myself. So I think there are people out there, they have companies or they have other people managing this for them. But for me, I spend every day through around about 2 hours at least. I get up very early in the morning. I'm reading the news. I need to see what is important for me and for my business. And then I curate and select the messages or the posts I want to share with my followers. And that's round about 20 million views per year at the moment.
Blimey. Wow. Okay. And has that, how has that viewership changed since, obviously we'll discuss the market that we're in now and the volatility around that. Has that happened overnight, or has that just been a gradual sort of increase in your followership?
No, this has basically an increased over a longer period, and it's also very consistent because, I know there's a lot of people out there, they also try to build up something there, but you need to be extremely consistent. And I mean not consistent for a week, for a month, for a year, I mean for years.
Yeah.
So I post every single day around about 3-4 times, and I look especially for data points because, in our industry, when you buy reports, they are quite costly, right? So to get market information, I'm sure you're also a specialist in memory. So you are interested in, okay, where's the DRAM market going? How is the market share? Who's the winner, who's the loser? And some of the great companies who are doing this and who provide the services, very valuable reports, they also give out some of their data for free as a teaser. And this kind of information, this is normally what I try to share. And also in a bigger context, understand more about the different industries, right? So like, for example, the mobile industry, the industrial industry, the AI, robotics, because this gives you a better understanding how is the market growing, right? Where is the market basically going? Because at the end of the day, I really need it for my own business. So I'm the COO and EVP of a memory technology holding company called Neumonda. Mm-hmm. And in this way, I need to be up to date about what is going on the market. So I'm not doing this to please someone. I basically do it because I need it for my own business.
I see. And everyone just reaps the rewards of that, don't they? So again, I think we're fairly aligned. I think you may have come across it. We obviously run a market intelligence foresight service here at Sims. So we obviously collate again, Sims have been around for sort of 30 plus years. So we've got a wealth of knowledge and experience, and we're able to give foresight on price and supply, again, across all segments, industrial, server, consumer, you name it. So yeah, that's obviously been very, very beneficial for our customers as well. So we sound pretty in line there. So I really appreciate that sort of drill down. And what I'll do is I'll put your LinkedIn down in the description. So after this podcast, people can go take a look and then have a follow. So again, we've discussed this. Sure. The premise of this podcast, again, it's really for me, I want to wrap up what the recent happenings in the DRAM and NAND market have been with a bit of foresight as to what we think can happen. Again, we kind of, do we really know? But for many that have been following it and they'll understand it at the stage that we're in, which feels like a kind of a bit of defining one in history, really. Again, I'm fairly new to this. You've been around much longer than me in this game. So, but again, it feels like a very, very weak, long drawn out market. So, but for those who don't, I suppose let's just get into it. And I don't just want to look back, start in the last 6 months. Let's take it back to the pandemic, and then we'll follow the story from there to get to where we are now in June 2023. So, in terms of the market then, what happened to demand and supply then that's kind of led us down to this road now? Can you give a bit of a backstory on that, and then we'll just follow that journey?
Sure. I mean, frankly speaking, I'm not so surprised about what has happened in the last 2-3 years because as you mentioned, I'm a little bit longer in the market, and I think even the strong dip, which people say, "Oh my God, this is really crazy." If you look in the history, especially on DRAM. I mean, we have seen this in the past, these cycles, like 1 year, like 60% up and then 30% down or 20% down. So it's like always extremely volatile. And this is basically because you have long cycles to build up capacity, right? So you maybe heard the term about CapEx.
Yeah.
So that's basically capital expenditure for the equipment. So even if a factory decides today, demand is going up, we need to build more capacity, it takes like 12 to 18 months to bring that factory up to speed. And then also, you need to yield, like you need to look that you have a high success rate on the chips, what you're getting out. So I think with the pandemic, there was just like, how to say this, there was like a special circumstances. And I think what everybody has heard about the automotive industry, they were suffering the most, right? Basically, in the early beginning of the start, the automotive industry had always kind of this mantra that, everybody, they were thinking, okay, everybody wants to do business with us and everything what we do, they just have to follow. Well, that's not how it works in the semiconductor industry. And I think especially the German car makers, they learned their lesson because, they were shutting down like their demand. And what happened because of the pandemic, some industry, consumer electronics and others, people have been home, like TVs, smartphones, you name it, was like booming, going through the roof. So when you look at foundries, like who had basically capacity, who needed capacity, they were filling this up for example, for processors in order to sell to these kind of consumer electronics. But of course, every CPU also needs memory, right?
Yeah.
So you need a DRAM. So without a DRAM, a CPU is not working. So that's also what helped the demand on the DRAM side during this period, and where you have seen a strong growth. And I'm sure probably also you had some challenges maybe with some customers where where they had trouble maybe to get parts. But lucky with Sims, I think you have not only one brand, you have a few brands, so you can help them because it's a commodity to find a replacement, right? Which is a smart way to do this. And what happened in, let's say, the last, I would say, 12 months, I would say the writing was on the wall already last year in Q2, is basically during this time, a lot of the OEMs, they have piled up inventory because they wanted to make sure, I have all these projects. I need to make sure I have inventory, no just-in-time production. They want to make sure I have my memory covered and also others, not only memory, other parts, and then basically being able to produce. Well, it turns out that 2022 was not continuing in that way as basically 2020 and 21 was. Just to give you an example in numbers, the global smartphone market in 2021 was 1.38 billion smartphones. In 2022, they predicted that the growth rate will be between 5 and 10%. In reality, it was 10% down.
Right, yeah.
So we're talking about 20% less. And 20% less in the smartphone market is around about 250 million smartphones less. So you can imagine how many memory is basically not needed. And you have seen a tremendous price drop on memory, on DRAM and on NAND since that time.
Yeah. So again, obviously taking it back to where, you've seen cycles like this in the memory market. Just how long ago was probably the one that was last similar to this? And do you truly believe that there have been ones that are similar to this?
Well, I think there's one indicator or one very interesting number I would like to share with all of us here, and that's the CapEx. So this year, the CapEx for DRAM is the lowest since 7 years in history. So the last time it was that low, it was 7 years ago. And for NAND, it's the lowest in 8 years. So normally when this happens, in combination with reduction of wafer starts, because let's explain again to the audience. So the one is basically for the machine, for the fabs, for the equipment, right? Where I told you need 12 to 18 months to ramp this up. The wafer starts is how many wafers you starting every month in order to get the output, because the machines have to run every day. You cannot really stop a wafer factory. That's just makes no sense. You have to do that. But you can reduce the input of the wafers into the factory. And if you follow this, like last year, Micron, SK Hynix, even Samsung, finally this year said, okay, we are reducing the wafer input. So normally from a wafer start until the finished product today, you need to calculate around about 4 months. Okay? This is the time what you need to basically to adapt to a uptick in the market or to a downturn in the market. And if you combine the reduced CapEx with reduced wafer starts, the market was still weak in Q1 and it's still weak in Q2. But I'm confident that we hit the button now. Because Samsung just announced around about in March and April, they will reduce the wafer starts. So to see an impact on this, we need to go into July. Until July, you still have the same quantity than before. No impact on the market. In parallel, you have how you call it, like depleting the inventory from the customers, right? So this is also happening. So now think about it. Everybody is reducing their inventory, maybe from, I don't know, from 8 weeks to 4 weeks, because they know, hey, the market price continuously goes down. We don't need to worry. We just wait because next month is getting cheaper, it's getting cheaper. Frankly speaking, you should not stress your luck too much at the moment, because the chance that you get a lower price, yes, maybe you can still get a lower price next month, maybe 1%, maybe 3 or 4. But the chance of the price going up is much higher. And it's not only 1 or 2%. We are talking then about double digit, right? We are talking about 10% and basically more.
Yeah. Okay. And obviously you mentioned there about, I was going to say, obviously ask you about the ASPs do continue to still go down in some areas. And again, we're seeing some bottoming out now, some leveling off and some price rises here and there. But what do we expect to bounce back quicker and some reasoning behind this? Do we expect it to be the DRAM or the NAND market that will bounce back a bit quicker?
Well, I think between DRAM and NAND, there's one fundamental difference. So in NAND, you have some kind of supply or demand elasticity, because if you know, NAND is also kind of a replacing technology for hard disk drives, right? So I know there are two camps and they say, hard drives will always be around and they will not replace. And I think to some extent, I agree. So there is some areas, some applications where hard drives are still, even in the next few years, I think a good solution. But there is a lot where you can replace. If the price point is low enough, then an SSD makes more sense than an HDD. Yeah. Okay? So you can sell more. If a manufacturer is offering a lower price, then you can move it. Well, on a DRAM, if you get a better price on a DRAM, how do you create more demand? Just building up inventory, right? Because you're not replacing another technology. So there it is a little bit more challenging, but there also the ups and downs are much more dramatic than on NAND. Yeah. Because the long-term NAND is kind of going down. But for DRAM, it's always like going up and down, and 1-2% can make a huge difference on demand in terms of the pricing. So I believe you probably will see a stronger impact going back, going up on the DRAM than probably you see on the NAND.
I see. Okay, and obviously last year and also into this year, obviously the terrible war in Ukraine, we're seeing rising inflation, that kind of thing across the world. Geopolitically as well, obviously, for those that don't know, obviously the semiconductor can really be seen as a way that's really reshaping geopolitical issues. It's really key. It's very much in the frame. Obviously, recently we've had the US export controls that have been preventing US companies from sort of selling advanced technology to China. How do you really see this and just general geopolitical issues between these countries affecting the semiconductor industry now and in the future in terms of revenue and output?
Okay, well, you used the terminology like semiconductor industry. Let me quickly start with memory within this segment, right? Because memory, you have basically three players: Samsung, SK hynix, Micron for DRAM. They own 95% of the market. Yeah. Plus then you have, for example, Winbond, Nanya with own fabs in Taiwan with a smaller portion. Then you have a lot of like fabless kind of companies like ISSI, ESMT, Etron. And you have in China, for example, CXMT, which is like a Chinese DRAM manufacturer. But that's basically it. These are the factories which are producing. And for NAND, in addition to Micron, Samsung, SK hynix, you have Kioxia and you have Western Digital, which are kind of together. And you have in China YMTC. Okay, so these are the big blocks. And I think it's very unlikely that we will see a new player coming into this industry, right? Because you need to have a lot of patents, you need a lot of experience, especially DRAM is a very, very big process to do this, right? So it's very unlikely that there will be new player coming in. So it's kind of an oligopoly for the DRAM. And frankly speaking, I believe on the NAND side, we will probably see another merger. So we will reduce. So I think there are some talks right now, you maybe heard about it, Kioxia, Western Digital, to basically come together. The challenge for them is, Drew, they don't have DRAM.
Yeah.
So they cannot offset if the market is going on NAND down. They don't have the revenue from DRAM, basically, where they can compensate for this. So that's a challenge for them. So I think there, in terms of geopolitics, I think there will be not really new fabs. The fabs will be mainly built in the areas where they are today. But for semiconductor in general, I mean, you heard about the news. I mean, this week it's just coming in like crazy. I mean, yesterday, $25 billion new fab from Intel in Israel.
Yeah.
Okay. $30 billion a new fab of Intel in Germany, like confirmed. Then I think TSMC in the USA, also TSMC in Germany. That's what many people speculate. And I believe this will happen in Dresden. So they will have another foundry there. Then Intel in Poland. I mean, who would have thought about this 4 or 5 years ago, that these factories will be built there? Nobody. Because everything was concentrated. And now put the geopolitics aside. Just pure risk management. It is not healthy to put a supply chain or like critical parts of the supply chain only in one regional area. So we should have even like, because even, let's be honest, the factories they are building in the US or in Europe, they are a good start and they have something good for the industry here locally. But for example, to support a customer like Apple, the factory is not enough what TSMC is building in the US. I mean, the volume, how they are ramping, when they need for their iPhones per year, the newest cutting edge technology will remain in Taiwan, right? But I think if you remember a few years ago, there was the big incident in Japan with Fukushima, right? Where there was the tsunami. And in Fukushima area, in Japan around, there was like a special epoxy, which was used for the electronic industry, which was all centered around there. So we are talking about areas, there's earthquake, there's tsunamis, there's power outages. There's a lot of these challenges. So I think in total, I think it's good for the semiconductor industry that also other regions having now like a little bit of the supply chain globally and it's more distributed. But I can tell you, it will be more costly for the end customer. You and I, we will pay more.
I will. Well, I suppose they're looking at it in a way like they do with cloud services now, that how many DCs can we have globally just to create that redundancy, really. So I think you've really explained that pretty well, to be honest. So I think you'd be in agreement with that, right? So,
right. Yes. Yes.
So with that, let's take a little look at emerging technologies. And before we sort of go into DDR5 and CXL, I actually just want to touch on ChatGPT and AI. So I've seen you cover this in your news, and we've all come across it quite a bit. So I think for those with ChatGPT, we've probably all heard about it by now. So it took, I believe it took just 5 days to reach 1 million users. Is that right? So
it was ridiculously short. Yes.
Yeah. So short. Quicker than all of the large tech companies. So that's moving at a pace, and AI in general is moving at a pace. Now, again, I don't know whether you can correct me on this, but we saw this news come out and kind of anticipated a bit of a demand and a bit of a tick up on certain DRAM due to this AI sort of speed. That, again, do you think that's happened? But if not, how quickly might that happen and put some stress on the DRAM market to sort of provide for that?
No, I think for sure the AI has an impact on the memory to a certain extent for two technologies. I mean, one is the high bandwidth memory, like HBM. This is normally like a technology where the DRAM manufacturers are directly involved with the manufacturers, for example, with an NVIDIA, with an AMD, in order to take the best possible solution that you have a higher bandwidth for the memory. Because actually DRAM in some ways sucks, because the technology is like you have to do a refresh. It's an old technology, but there's no technology basically coming out which is replacing this. So the bottleneck today in processing data is kind of the data path between the processor and the memory. And so to make this high bandwidth memory, they're using like TSV technology, where they have like many micro holes they're going through. They're connecting several chips together. And so you have like a higher bandwidth, right? But of course, you also have AI solution which still taking kind of the traditional, you mentioned it like DDR5 technology or DDR4 technology, which is then on the memory module. Both technologies, I think, looking forward, because you have different levels of AI, on-premise, cloud, data, highly specialized for academia. So I think there's a lot of solutions out there. But one thing is clear: if you look on a current AI server for AI purpose, it's already double the RAM what the normal data center server needs.
Yeah.
And the next generation AI server will have triple or even more RAM. So no matter if it's coming in a chip package, like which is on a DRAM module, or if it's on an HBM, on a special package, it means more dice, more wafer allocated for AI. For sure.
Right.
This is definitely pushing the industry.
And in terms of HBM, what manufacturers are sort of working in that area at the moment? Are we just talking the larger manufacturers, the ones that you mentioned, the Microns, the SK Hynix, or is it spreading down further down the chain?
It's a little bit of a challenge, right? Because if you look into HBM, I think we are now at HBM3. I think SK Hynix has pretty good product portfolio. Samsung has a good product portfolio. I think Micron is going into this direction. It's kind of a standard, right? It's a JEDEC standard. But there are also solutions out where I think there are customized solutions where you can use an ASIC or another chip in between, where you can create based for a customer a solution, which maybe fits a smaller application better than only the big ones. Because, the biggest customer is AWS, like Amazon, is Alphabet, Google, Microsoft, Azure, Baidu, Alibaba. These are the big guys, and they go with this solution from NVIDIA, AMD, and from others. But I think this ecosystem has also some variances where people maybe don't want to have things in the cloud. They want to have their AI on premise. I'm not sure, you maybe also heard about some challenges when people copying information into ChatGPT and asking for advice, codes or anything. The problem is all the information you are putting into ChatGPT is public domain.
Yeah.
And I think even Samsung had this incident that the engineers, they got some coding solved, but basically the information was out in the wild.
Yeah.
So they basically stopped allowing this to do this. So I think you have to be very cautious how you feed AI. I mean, it's great, and I would everybody suggest to at least have a ChatGPT account, play around with this, asking questions, because this is the future. If you don't know how to use this for yourself or your business, you will be left behind.
Yeah, it's just, I think a lot of people have been actually a bit daunted by it in terms of, their understanding, is this going to replace jobs or things like that? But actually, it's just another resource, to be honest. And it can just
exactly.
For instance, in our marketing team, it just adds to our marketing team here,
Yes.
Yeah. And so you mentioned, so I just want to talk a bit more about adoption and going back to those technologies. So specifically DDR5 and CXL.
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of adoption, how does that work, let's say, in the data center world? Because obviously, I think you mentioned AWS there around HBM. Mm-hmm. Will adoption start with the hyperscalers and work its way down through the sort of tier ones to the lower CSPs, things like that? How does it work with adopting new technology in this area?
Okay. I probably, as an example, I would like to stay with DDR5, because this is probably more understandable for the people. Let's say a DDR5 module. First of all, the deployment of this new technology, of a new DRAM technology, is very much driven by the chipset manufacturer, right? For example, Intel. So Intel had the last few years, probably people also have heard this in the media, quite some challenges with their release of products, like with delays in bringing products out. And this also had an impact on the roadmaps and on the output for the DRAM manufacturers. But this year, Intel is heavily pushing out DDR5 enabled chipsets. And they are pushing, also working together with the DRAM manufacturer, that they have a higher adoption rate on DDR5. Because also the DRAM manufacturer has an interest to sell the newest technology, not necessarily the DDR3, DDR5. But I'm sure you also have customers, they are still happy to get, for example, DDR3 or DDR4, and they also need to find solutions, right?
Yeah.
So it's very much driven really by CPUs, by chipsets, how they push this out and how is this available? How many parts are available? And then if the strategies are aligned, the deployment goes out, right? And that's basically what we see this year. I think this year is a big push in the data center to DDR5 because you also have higher density memory modules, which you basically can use. You have higher speed. And that's basically everything. The more density you have, the more virtual servers you can make, the more higher speed, the more data you can process. And then you mentioned CXL, right? So you also mentioned this. HBM, there are also huge steps moving forward, the industry with standardization, bringing products out, bringing this as another mix into the game, right? Because it's a standard, right? So that helps our industry. It's kind of a commodity. You have more players who are offering this. And I think this is always very positive and better than a proprietary solution, right? Where you would stick only to one vendor, because our customers, your customers are basically also driven by supply chain sustainability. So this means like they need to be able to have like different products on their bill of materials when there's an issue with one vendor, so they have another source in order to make the product ready for their customers.
Yeah. Sure. Okay. And obviously, we mentioned data center, and I know you've got is your background largely in industrial and embedded that area? Is it, or is it spread across various segments?
Yeah. So basically, I started within the IT industry, so I'm familiar with server data centers. But I think in the market segment of memory, I'm mainly focusing on industrial and specialty customers who need longevity, long tail type of memory. So it's a little bit of a different requirement, and I think you have also similar requirements that you have both worlds. You are serving industrial, but you're also serving data centers.
And on these segments, and talking about future demand, obviously you mentioned about not really seeing things sort of change dramatically until probably Q3, Q4. Do we think these data center and industrial and embedded sort of segments are the ones that are going to drive this demand back, or is consumer and gaming going to keep up? What segments do we really think is going to drive future growth?
Well, there are different ways to look at it. So I normally look at segments which the biggest CAGR per year, right? Who have the biggest growth per year. And I can tell you, it's not smartphones, because we have a saturated market. So we have a replacement market. But already since 2022, we have more mobile phone contracts than people living on Earth. Okay, that's a pretty good indicator that you will not continue, that you will go up with the growth rate like before, right? But you will still probably have 3% growth rate on average this year. They say 1%, but not like in the past. Then, for example, computer notebooks. Well, that's also kind of saturated. There probably you will have like 4 to 6% growth rate. Also not so big. What is big is industrial. So a lot of there are several market research companies, including Gartner's, including McKinsey and others. They predict that for industrial semiconductor is like around 13% per year growth. For data center, similar, like 30%, also driven by AI. Yeah. And then for wireless infrastructure, everything kind of communication infrastructure. These are the biggest driver, and they can also pivot. Right, especially the data center guys. You made a good point before when we talk about artificial intelligence. So that's sucking up definitely some demand, right? And they only have a certain output there. And when they pivot more into this segment, last year was the first time in history that mobile DRAM was outpaced by server DRAM. So bit shipment. Yeah. Because if you think about, you need a lot of DRAM bits for a server on a data center, but not so much on a smartphone, right? Yeah. Even you have on a smartphone now maybe between 6 and 12 gigabyte. How much you have on a server? We are talking 192 gig.
Yeah, exactly.
And more on that. So that's basically outpaced, and this will not change again. So the biggest share on bit output in the future will be servers and data center for DRAM. So they have a big influence on the allocation of the DRAM and on the output, and this can change then basically.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I appreciate that, and I feel like we've covered a tremendous amount there. So, just bringing it back to sort of that's what sort of happened, and again, we've sort of touching on what's come. I just want your sort of your parting advice really to our customers and to our viewers. You know, we're in a weak market, prices are low. What would you say to them to expect over the 12 months, and how they should go about their business as such in a DRAM and NAND market?
Mm-hmm. Well, as I mentioned in the beginning, they maybe would be able to get a little bit of better pricing in the next 4 to 6 weeks, maybe. But you have to understand, the DRAM manufacturer at the moment, they are not making millions or 100 millions of loss per quarter. They make billions, billions of loss. I mean, I talk about 2 billion loss from Micron with a 3.7 billion revenue. SK Hynix,
and we've seen it, unfortunately, in the workforces, we've seen tremendous cuts as well, haven't we? So it's been...
Yes, exactly. So it's pretty clear. It's not rocket science. It must be clear for everybody that it will not stay on that level. So I normally advise also like people in the industry right now, if you have like a stable business, let's say like industrial business, and you have like long-term agreements with customers you need to make and you need to deliver, make sure you get a good price right now with your supplier, with your distributor, or with your manufacturer. Be fair, don't be too greedy, because I think it always comes back, right? So like sometimes it's a buyer's market, sometimes it's a seller's market. The best thing is you find a fair way. So I would normally advise people right now to look a little bit in the future to secure for the next 12 to 18 months their demand for a fair price for both sides, and then make sure you know that you get it, because the chance for much lower prices is not there anymore. Really not. It's not healthy. But the chance for going up, just one more number I want to throw out there. Gartner just came out with it. They predict next year 70% growth in the DRAM market. 70%. And the World Semiconductor Trade Organization said 46% growth on DRAM. So again, these are research companies. Maybe you cannot believe one, but let's say if 2, 3 are coming out with some numbers, you get a pretty good indication. The way is up. Okay, so I think that's pretty clear. And secure your supply chain. Make sure, depending on your product, if it's a consumer product, of course, then you bid at the time when all the others do. And then it's just how is your appetite for risk and how much cash you have, that you keep some extra inventory. But I would strongly advise to secure and to negotiate right now, still a good deal possible for the next 12 to 18 months.
Okay. Well, thank you, and that's some really, really good advice for our customers and for our viewership to take away today. So, again, I want to thank you for coming on and taking the time to speak to me, Marco. Hopefully, we can do this in another 6 months, and let's see where the market's at and see what's changed in line with what we said. So, but yeah, as I said, I will drop Marco's LinkedIn in the description, and hopefully we can add to your followership there as well. And again, Sims here, we run a free of charge foresight service where we do monthly DRAM and NAND updates, sort of for giving foresight on pricing and supply across all of those segments that we've mentioned as well. So I will put that link in below. But yeah, thank you for listening today, everyone. And Marco, thank you for coming on. I hope you have a nice evening in Taiwan.
All right. Thank you very much. You're very welcome.
Thank you.
Cheers.